Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having the best of bestestest Mondays ever. Today we're going to be jumping into a little bit of malicious compliance. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. Also, check out the Karma Comment Chameleon podcast. On any of the major podcast platforms, just search for Karma Comment Chameleon. Our first story today comes to us from Bishopragz. 10 cents costs more than you would think. Let's jump right in. So up until a few months ago, I worked for one of the large soda cola companies. I won't name which one, but trust me, you've drank at least one of their products in your lifetime. I started off in the warehouse as an order selector. The pay was decent at the time. And after 3 years, I moved to an auditor position at the trucking gate. Now, the plant wasn't too bad, and I ended up making an entire host of friends I still speak with to this day. The major problem with the company was the attitude of anyone not on an hourly wage, the executive branch. To give you an example, when nearly my entire state froze over last January, management originally planned to use our PTO, paid time off, to pay for workdays missed due to the hazardous road conditions. For those of you in the north, the big freeze completely shut down any and all services over the course of a week, including transportation, metro buses, and light rail trains. Of course, once this got back to the workers, there was an entire blow-up that forced a town hall meeting with words like strike and walkout thrown around, and management quickly changed course. This is just one of many stories I could tell here. As for my personal story, my move was a gift and a bane simultaneously. When the pandemic began, many of us increasingly became hesitant to come to work. We were labeled essential workers during the initial stay-at-home order, yet we had no protections from COVID. No masks, no sanitizers, no protocols. A number of people left or let themselves be terminated once unemployment benefits were severely increased. Eventually, the company gave us a pay incentive of about 20% to keep us there. Several months later, the pay incentive was made permanent in an attempt to replenish the work pool. Unfortunately, I didn't receive that pay raise. A few weeks before this was made official, I was moved without my consent to basically a general labor job, a jack of all trades, by a former shift supervisor. We weren't friends, basically. When I questioned HR about this, I was told that the pay incentive was for the order selector position, which I no longer did. At that moment, I applied to move out of the warehouse immediately, seeing as people who were just starting the job, some of whom I was currently training at the time, were making well more than myself, who had been there for over 3 years. A slap in the face to say the least. I started my position at the gate, auditing our delivery trucks leaving, returning from their routes, counting product basically, and inspecting the loads the common carriers, rig drivers, would pick up. Easy job despite the heavy footwork, and I was working in an office with friends who had also left the warehouse for something better. The biggest problem was being understaffed, as I worked 10-hour days, 6 days a week, since there was no one else to fully cover the truck's departure and return to the facility. Someone simply had to be at the gate, and thus, that someone was me. Management, wondering why I was accumulating so much overtime, couldn't do much to stop me, seeing as they had no plans to hire anyone to help take some of the load off due to budgetary restraints. Stepping into the Wayback Machine, 2 years earlier, the company decided to go the more health-conscious route. Our insurance costs had risen, and switched out the usual basic vending machines in the break room. Installed now were 3 fridges of healthy off-brand alternatives, cheap meal packs you would see at Walmart next to the costlier name-brand items. Also installed were 2 kiosks for payment. You grab whatever food you want, scan it on the screen, and pay. The kiosk gave no change back. If your meal was $4 and you paid with a $5 bill, you just lost $1. So nearly all of us paid by card. Also, in the break room was a time clock for punching in for the day, lunch, and clocking out. I bought from the kiosk once per day for my lunch, to the point I could do the process blindfolded. Also, there were cameras attached to the kiosks, just in case someone, there's always one, decides to try a quick dine and dash without paying. Now here comes the fun part. Like a typical Saturday shift, I come into work, check my trucks, start working on my end of day reports, and go to lunch. Now, all of us have that one annoying coworker who wants to tell you their life story. And of course, he's in the break room for lunch and wants to dictate his latest sob story. I'm normally a nice guy and try not to be rude. So while somewhat listening to the same complaints he's already spilled to me before, I rush to just grab my food, pay with my card, clock out for lunch, and head back to my area. Basically, I was hurrying to get the heck away from him. A month later, my current supervisor, good guy who takes care of his workers, pulls me outside. I was flagged at the machine for non-payment on the day described above, meaning the company thought I had stolen the food. You see, when you used a credit or debit card at the kiosk, it asks you if you'll accept the 10-cent surcharge for using said card. Apparently, I had missed that prompt to accept it, thus management declaring it as theft. I ended up having to print out my bank statement for that particular day to show the payment had gone through, and then write a statement saying this was just a misunderstanding and would allow the entire charge to be taken out of my next check. It was only about $3.50 total. And so I thought that would be the end of it. No one spoke to me any further about the situation, including the person who ended up being the one to review the camera footage. More on that in a minute. Near the end of the next month, my supervisor pulls me into his office and lets me know management is terminating me. His hands were tied, seeing as it was a him or me decision, and I was being let go for a health and safety violation. In the years prior, the only mark on my record was a write-up for attendance for calling off work due to a mental health issue, clinical depression. And they had chosen to escalate this to firing me over 10 cents. One single dime. After turning in my badge and clearing my laptop of any work files, I left and began the process of finding another job, while also filing a report with the ethics committee. My supervisor and former coworker convinced me to fight back for my job. They needed me since I was the only one willing to work the long hours and do all of the reports to be sent off. But after trying to get a hold of HR for 2 weeks and getting no response, I gave up and resumed my search for employment. Turns out this event was a blessing in disguise. See, the guy who reviewed the camera footage was the facility supervisor. Let's call him Tom. Tom and I, while being professional, never got along. He viewed me as just another nameless worker drone, and I viewed him as a corporate snake with a Cheshire smile. Tom was the guy my supervisor directly reported to, hence the him or me decision. Tom passed me in the hallways almost every single day, even while all of this was happening, and never did more than give off his usual, "Hello OP, don't work too hard out there." Tom had the final call on these matters. Tom, also it turns out, was over the yearly budget. So remember when I said a number of people had left and that the pay incentive was only for order selectors? Well, due to being so short-handed, everyone from the warehouse to distribution, to the drivers, to the production teams were forced to work overtime in an attempt to catch up to the missed and delayed orders. 6 days a week, no set end time, you leave when work is finished, which ended up causing another mass exodus. Being short-staffed, they couldn't simply move someone into my position, causing the team leads to do work they weren't trained for. Oh, and the team leads were salary, so no overtime for them. This was 3 months ago now. I start work at a new company in a few weeks in shipping and receiving. My old coworkers recently told me Tom was forced to hire 3 new people to replace me, despite all the previous blustering about budgetary concerns. And none of them are going to last till the end of the year. Reason? It's currently summertime down here in the south, with the daily temperature hitting 100 degrees on average, and when your job is to audit trucks, you spend a lot of time outside in the heat. None of them have learned the reporting software and spend most of their time in the office on their phones. So instead of making a rational decision on a seasoned worker who liked his job and willingly did the dirty work, Tom had to hire 3 new guys at $15 an hour to fill in for one guy, all over a 10-cent surcharge. Oh, and I no longer drink dark soda or cola anymore. Alright, jumping down to the comment section in this one, we have one from a user called AnyConfusion4526. It says, I would have sued for wrongful termination, make them prove the health and wellness issue, and during discovery, it would have come to light that not only did you pay for the food, they deducted the price of food plus the surcharge from your paycheck, which is a federal no-no. They would have been fined a big amount and had to pay you for lost wages. Going back into the story, I believe OP said that they were okay with having that surcharge taken out of their paycheck. Even though it's a federal no-no, if OP consented to it and signed papers to it, I don't think there's much that could be done there. Making them prove the reason for termination could be a thing though, but you have to know that the managers would probably falsify the paperwork to make it look like OP had been written up, and there's really nothing OP could do about that either. OP, I wish you nothing but the best at your new company. I hope it really works out for you. This next story comes to us from Expensive Theme 7023. You want eye contact? Okay, sir. Let's jump right in. Background: I used to work retail in a DVD CD store that rhymes with Manatee, Australia. We had computers that we could use to find certain titles and artists in the store if we had it in stock, or we could even order from any of the other 300 stores in the country and have it shipped to the store. Many people would use this for older CDs or collector items that were harder to get. One day, an older bloke came in asking about a certain smaller 80s rock band that I can't remember. I looked on the computer for him and was able to track down their album names, which of those albums he wanted, located the album in stores around the country, and got his details to enter into the computer for when the albums arrived in store, so that we could contact him. He thanked me and said that he was so happy that we could get these albums in for him, and left the store. The next day, I get called into the boss's office because of a customer complaint. It was, and is, my only ever complaint in any job for the past 9 years of working. He had rang up and complained that while my service was lovely, I didn't make enough eye contact when I was using the computer. Cue Malicious Compliance. 3 days later, he came in because he had another band he wanted to order. Luckily, I was working. As soon as he walked in, I greeted him with the biggest smile and locked him straight in the eyes. When he asked for if we had any of his band in stock, I typed it into the computer while maintaining direct eye contact. It took me about 4 tries to find the right keyboard letters, as I wasn't that great at touch typing. He was starting to get annoyed, but he didn't voice it. Then, I had to search what store location these albums were at. That took another couple of attempts to type. I turned the computer monitor around to the point it looked like it was going to snap off. I had to move displays from the counter, which took more time, but finally I was able to set it up at such an angle that I could read off with a quick glance, but also still maintain eye contact. At this point, he started to squirm and look away, but I was only beginning. Next was his details and taking his deposit, normally $10. It took me a solid 6 attempts to enter his details into the system, as you had to select each box to type in, and that was hard, considering I wasn't looking. At this point, he had gone rather quiet and was looking at his shoes. When he handed me his money, I still maintained direct eye contact and even dropped it accidentally out of my hand, which then led me to awkwardly slap around on the counter until my hand found it. Wouldn't want to break that eye contact looking for a few coins. After all the typing attempts, it took me an extra 10 minutes to serve him, all because I couldn't look at what I was doing. To this day, I've seen him a couple of times, but he won't come to my register, and he doesn't make eye contact or hides in the aisles until I'm busy with another customer. A shame, he really had such lovely brown eyes. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Orange Oliviero. The error here by the manager was passing the complaint along. People will always complain about things. Your job as a manager is to shift through the complaints for areas that are valid items to bring up with your staff, and otherwise brush off or ignore the rest. The same goes for when you're a middle manager. Your job is to shelter your staff from BS so that they can get their jobs done. So if someone from another team or upper management wants your team to do something or do things differently, Your job is to take on the items that are reasonable and feasible and push back on the rest. So many managers don't seem to realize that your primary job function is to be a crap umbrella so that your staff doesn't get distracted by it. Okay, I can agree with this that in some cases the manager should be shielding the employees from some things that come down from head office. However, in this case, it very well could be an automated system where it gets passed on to the store automatically when a customer puts in a complaint. Now, the manager should still be looking at that and deciding if the complaint has merit and how to deal with it. I feel like in this case, the manager could have just sent a note to their regional manager or district manager and said, "This complaint is absolutely BS, let's not have it appear on this employee's record." Now, going back to how OP handled the situation, I absolutely loved it. Keeping eye contact with the customer the whole time, having to do things over and over, really drove home the point that their complaint was absolute BS. I think the only thing that would have made this better is if OP kept a smile on their face, one of those crazy looking ones, you know, from The Shining, the whole time they were working with the customer. Because why not make them as uncomfortable as you possibly can? This next story comes to us from Strikeronima, costing a company millions. Let's jump right in. So I work as a QA quality assurance at a factory I'll call Ida Orr. To get started, I'll explain their report process. When something goes wrong in the factory that's directly tied to quality, such as bad coloring or defects, I, as a QA lead, would have to write a report. These reports were very detailed and extremely time-consuming. Now, when something went wrong that wasn't directly tied to quality, but affected it, such as a machine breaking or foreign material getting in the machines, the lead in charge of the machines was supposed to write the report. Somehow, all the reports ended up being written by me, even though I had my own time-consuming job to do. I had been fighting to not do others' reports for months, and my boss told me to remind other leads when a report was needed. One day, I'm doing my reports plus my data analysis duties, and I hear over the radio that a refrigerator unit has gone out, and all the product was coming out as boiled mush instead of frozen. So I call refrigeration and tell them, "You need to do a report on this, and I'll send out an email counting how many pallets of product we lost." So I send the email and continue on with my day. 2 weeks later, my boss calls me into our office and asks me why I didn't write a report on the incident. I say, "You told me to remind the other leads to do it and not to write their reports." She responded, "Well, if you have time to send an email, you have time to write a report." Then she makes me sign a write-up for failure to do my duties, which I did placidly, cause she had written up everyone else in my department and had been looking for something to write me up for, so I decided to let her have it and get it out of the way. Well, a couple months later and the exact same thing happens, and all I do is tell refrigeration over the radio to write a report. I did nothing else, knowing that refrigeration wouldn't write it. Because there was no report or helpful emails, the product was almost shipped out 2 months later, but it was caught by one of my QAs who mentioned the incident to my boss. Boss calls me to her office and tells me, "This incident is going to cost the company millions in storage fees for the time it was already stored, disposal fees, lost product, and a fine from Walmart for not meeting contract. Why didn't you email me about this?" I said, I didn't have the time, but I did tell refrigeration to write a report. She couldn't write me up for it cause I had emails from her telling me how to handle these situations. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Oblaman. It says, "Incompetent management couldn't or wouldn't make the right people do their jobs and just relied on you doing an unfair share of the work. They're idiots for not recognizing the risks of such a policy." I would say part of the problem here was OP and part of the problem here was the incompetent management. Yes, the management was expecting the reports from OP, but because OP had done them in the past, even though it wasn't OP's job. And it sounds to me like they didn't fight back until this actual story. When OP mentioned to management that somebody else was supposed to be doing that report and not them, the issue should have been fixed right then. Management should have had a meeting, and talked to everybody and made sure that the correct people were doing the reports for the correct issues. But of course, that's not how it happens in real life when most management is actually manglement and doesn't know what they're doing. Alright, remember to check out the KCC podcast on any of the major podcast carriers. Just search for Karma Comment Chameleon. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.